Deep dive interviews with music gear inventors, builders, creators, and tone chasers. The Gear Gab Podcast with Eric Dahl uncovers the behind-the-scenes stories of the music gear that inspires us. And now, here's your host, Eric Dahl.
Well, we've got a special treat with Gear Gab. We're going to be talking with Steve Marek. He is the Associate Production Manager with SHURE. And, I don't think SHURE needs a lot of explanation, but we're going to get into that. Obviously, over 100 years old. But, Steve, thanks for coming on the show.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
I've got to brag on you some to where, besides being with SHURE microphones and, of course, headphones and everything else, all the sound reinforcement, also, you yourself are a sound engineer, record, mix, master. You've got a rates on your website. I saw it, cool website. And you're a bass player in multiple bands. And I was kind of checking out your Olympic bass.
Yes, guilty as charged on all counts. And yeah, I love that Olympic bass. It's unique and it's kind of freaky. And actually, the band I play in has two bass players. So the Olympic has this very kind of aggressive upper mid-rangey tone that really cuts in a way that isn't a traditional bass tone, but when you have to find that separate lane in your arrangements, it works really well.
So for people, joining us on the show, Steve, I'd like to cover this a little bit to where, how long have you been a musician? I mean, at what age did you start playing? And then what age did you start recording and mixing?
Yeah, so I've been playing music. I started when I was maybe like a freshman in high school, maybe 8th grade, something like that. So going on about 25 years of playing music. And then probably around college, I started taking some recording courses and had access to the studio at my university. And that's when I really got into it and just became pretty quickly obsessed once you start, chasing sounds and trying to make records on your own. So I've been doing that, I guess, for about almost 20 years now.
Wow.
Yeah.
And also, you've worked with a number of incredible bands, too. I checked out your resume on that. And you've done some pretty serious recording and mixing.
Yeah, I've been super lucky to work with some really awesome artists, which are totally inspiring to work with. Some of my favorites, a couple recent ones. One of my bandmates, his name is Namdi. He's one of the most creative people I know, and I was able to mix one of his records, and that was super fun. It's amazing to be able to, deconstruct some. It's like getting a look inside someone's brain. So his record was really awesome to mix. I recently did a live record with a band called Hooray for the Riff Raff. They played at a venue, in Chicago called the Old Town School of Folk Music, and they sound great. And the best thing you can have as a recording engineer is a band that already sounds great. And then it's up to you to mess it up. Why make it sound great?
Yeah, or take it to the next level.
Yeah. And then another artist that I work with really often is a guy who plays trumpet. His name's Marquise Hill. And he's just an incredible jazz musician, super inspiring to work with, just to see his process. He's thinking like 12 steps ahead. It's like a game of musical chess. So,
and it's not always easy to mic and mix horns. I mean, like so many instruments that are a challenge, but you really got to have the ear and the right tools to do it with horns.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. And it's actually interesting that you bring that up because trumpet specifically, when it comes to like SHURE wireless systems, which I'll admit I'm not an expert in wireless, but we do when they have a process called, I believe it's called compansion, which is basically the algorithm that's used with digital wireless to transmit it over the airwaves. Actually, it might apply to analog wireless too. The wireless guys are probably clenching their butts hearing me talking about this. But anyway, when we test those different systems that are being used, we use something called a Mushra test, which is basically just like a blind test that gives you the same stimuli in different order to make sure that you have good ears. And if your listening isn't reliable, they just throw out the data. But trumpet is one of those things that when it gets into, I guess, whatever's happening in the wireless audio transmission, trumpet is something that with cheaper wireless systems, you get a lot of artifacts. And so that is like the gold standard. If you can make trumpet sound good over wireless, then you're in great shape.
Well, and I've got to bring this up too. You've been with SHURE for 14 years, and I think you started out as a writer, with writing. I mean, is that for how you first got in with the company?
Yeah, I started pretty much right out of college. I got a job in our technical writing department. which is really fun because it's a great way. Your job is basically to write the user manuals for all these, often very complicated audio products. So I learned a lot about like networked audio and digital audio and just like how to use microphones properly. You learn a lot of, how the sausage is made basically. So after I think I worked in that group for about 4 or 5 years, and then I switched over to product management. So rather than writing about a product that already exists, now we have to cook up an idea of something that doesn't exist and kind of document it. So I'm basically just doing the same thing in reverse.
Well, you get to do the fun stuff though, because you and I were talking before we started the show, Steve, to where I came to your NAM booth in Anaheim, California this past year, which I always do. But it was really one of the most fun times. It was like, if it hadn't been packed with people, I would have stayed longer and played with more of the microphones and headphones and everything else that you guys had going there, sure. But one of the things that blew me away, were the KSM mics, and you were involved in all three of these.
Yeah, I would say the KSM mics that we just launched are probably the highlight of my career. We were working on them for a really long time, and just studio microphones are really close to my heart. I'm obviously in a studio environment right now, so anytime that we get the chance to work on a microphone like that is a really lucky opportunity because some of the KSM mics are actually 2 out of the 3 of them are a refresh of microphones that we launched, I believe, in 1998. So only once every 25 or 30 years you get that opportunity. So I just happen to be, working at SHURE at the right time to get that. And hopefully I will be long retired by the next time that they get touched.
Well, what amazed me though, when they put me through all three microphones, and I was telling you this, to where all three of them sound great, and certainly they all three do different things. But man, that medium one, the 40, was really, I love the warmth of that one.
Yeah, and they all look very similar. They share a lot of the same DNA, but they have actually pretty stark differences between them. So there's the KSM 32, the KSM 40, and the KSM 44. And so the KSM 44 is kind of the flagship of that microphone line. That has a 1-inch dual diaphragm capsule, so you get multiple polar patterns, which is omnidirectional, cardioid, and figure 8. And that one is the flagship in terms of, I don't want to say fidelity because they're all very high fidelity. But that one is, I guess, the most kind of lifelike and true to life reproduction. The circuitry in it is really fast. Capsules, all of the capsules that we build are hand built one at a time. People think of SHURE as being like a company that you think of like highly automated production processes, which is true of a lot of the stuff that we make. But the microphones are actually still made by one person, one at a time in our factory. Which is not what you
based in Chicago, Illinois.
Well, our headquarters, all of our engineering is based in Chicago, and then we have manufacturing plants all over the world. So these microphones are made in our plant, which is in Juarez, Mexico. So they are made in North America. And but anyway, so they're across those 3 microphones. The 44 has like really low noise floor. It's 5 dB. And with those 2 diaphragms, you get very little proximity effect. So you get a big sweet spot, and the frequency response, it's not like ruler flat or boring or anything, but it is like when you hear something, just the realism that you get out of it is really awesome. And it's great in stereo pairs. And then the KSM 40, I think, which is the one that you were saying that you really liked, is a single diaphragm version of that. And so that one gets a little bit more proximity effect, but has the same kind of tonal characteristics. So if you're someone who's recording vocals or you just need a cardioid pattern, that one is a great choice. And really the thing that is characteristic of all of our KSM condenser microphones is we use a proprietary backplate design, which is designed to control modal behaviors or resonances within the diaphragm. So one of the things that people always notice when they use one of these microphones, a lot of times, especially if they're using it in something like drum overheads or vocals, is that with a lot of microphones, even good microphones, ones that, I use all the time in studio sessions, but sometimes you have these really sharp resonant peaks and it might be at like 6K or 7K. And so you get, drummers, an engineer referred to that as the whistles that they get on their cymbals, and obviously with vocals you get something like sibilance. But because we don't have any really sharp peaks, all the frequency response is really smooth. They're very forgiving, but they're still like detailed and airy, which is kind of a unicorn kind of characteristic with a lot of microphones.
So that's what I noticed, even in the crazy, NAMM show atmosphere with all the noise and people and everything. was just the clarity and the warmth. And also, I like the design on, what you and the team did with the KSM models, Steve, to where, it's got with the way the grill is on the front and everything. So it looks, it still looks like a Shure, but also it's kind of got a modern feel to it also.
Yeah, well, you nailed it there because that was our goal. The older KSM microphones, for anybody who's watching or listening to this, if you haven't seen them, they're a little bit larger and they're silver and they look like 1998 basically in a microphone. In fact, when we were doing some research when we were getting this project off the ground, and an engineer who we were asking him kind of what do they think of the appearance of our new designs versus the old ones, and he said the old one reminds me of like a 90s Ford Taurus, and I was like, ooh, okay, that one stings a little bit, but it was very true. So
And you and I were talking though. It's like, cause I was going to break them out, but I didn't want to pull out all of my old vintage Shure microphones. Cause I've got a 51, I've got the vintage 55, and then I've got the new ones. I mean, like, as you and I know from recording, from playing live and recording, you got to have your 58, you got to have your 57. My favorite vocal mic out, Steve, is always the SH55 that essentially looks like the old timey microphones from the 50s, but it's got the SM 58 element in it. That's
yep,
yeah.
yep, exactly, yeah, and those are still popular to this day. We all care about how a microphone looks, even though there's the utility side of it. Like at least for me personally, I'm like a moth towards a light when I see a microphone that I like.
Well, and here's another one that you worked on that I'm using also is the SM7DB.
Yeah, so that's an SM7B with basically an integrated preamp in it. So it was a pretty obvious decision that we made, but we see a lot of SM7s out there, and if you're running through an interface that has preamps that maybe don't have a ton of gain, a lot of people are using the cloud lifter or any type of inline booster, which is like it's a lump in the line and it's an extra piece of gear. If you're using them, especially if you have to travel with anything.
Oh, yeah.
And so we decided, well, we can just build our own preamp that will go directly into the microphone built in. And so if you bypass it, it still acts exactly as an SM7B would. It's a true bypass circuit. And then if you want, you can add, I believe, let me look at what the gain settings are. They are either 18 or 28 dB of gain. So it's selectable, not just a fixed amount. So all you need is phantom power, and you pull
All
up
on
the
the back.
microphone. Yep.
Yeah.
So it's
And like you and I were talking too, and like so many of the Shure microphones and products, and certainly getting into more of the software and everything else, Steve. But for broadcast and radio and everything, this was the SM7 has been an industry standard for years.
Yeah, and I was actually just looking at the sales data of the SM7 the other day, and basically, that microphone is 50, maybe 52, 53 years old now, something like that, which, is initially designed to be a premium broadcast mic that radio stations were buying, and sales were really, in fact, I think the microphone maybe during like the 1990s, it was like very close to being discontinued just because we didn't sell a ton of them. People loved the microphone, but
Oh,
because it was used in like really high tier broadcasts and there was no such thing as a podcast yet. So the sales were pretty modest. And then what we saw when podcast uh, applications started taking off, probably around 2008, 2009, we saw a little
yeah.
bit of a lift. And then during the pandemic, it just totally spiked. Everyone had to have one because people are operating in spaces that often aren't treated, and so the microphone rejects the sound of your room. You can't break them. They just sound like a radio voice, and it's the sound that we all know. Similar to like an SM58 where, a live sound engineer might have a bunch of different vocal mics that they could use, but it's like tattooed in your brain, like exactly what that microphone sounds like. If you need everybody knows it.
Well, and for me also with the SM58, Steve, it's like I always like how it makes my voice sound. I've tried other microphones, and certainly I've had engineers and different people try different mics, but for some reason the roll off with the 58 just always works for me.
Yep, and I think we're so accustomed to that, and there's a lot of really cool stuff. The SM58 might just look like a regular dynamic mic, but there's a lot of cool stuff going on in there. It uses a pneumatic shock mount, which requires just a stupid amount of math that I don't understand, just pages and pages for that system to work. And so a lot of other dynamic microphone capsules, whether they're Shure or other brands, they basically, you have a self-contained system, whereas the
Yeah.
58, the handle is actually part of the system. And if you change one thing about the SM58, it would throw the whole system completely out of whack. So it's actually pretty advanced, even though it came out in, I don't remember what year it came out, but that microphone is at least 60 something years old.
Well, and I remember, doing gigs also, Steve, and I'm sure you do also, playing with bands, to where everybody always talks about with the 57, you could hammer a nail with it. And I've actually seen people do things they shouldn't with 57s and then plug them in and amp a, mic and amplifier, guitar amp or whatever, and it works fine. It's like going, that's kind of crazy. Yep. Don't do that with your microphones. I mean, I'm not jacking.
Yeah, well, they're only $100, so if you really wanna beat them up, go for it.
But they still sound so good. You know what I
They
mean?
do,
It's like,
yeah.
like I told you, it's like, I know I've got at least 2 or 3 57s, and I've got at least 2 58s, and then I've got the 2 of the 55s and 1 super 55.
Yep, and I mean, there's a reason that they're still ubiquitous in the world because they sound great and you just can't break them. And, we have some other really cool, vocal microphones and instrument microphones and everything that are for specific applications.
Right.
One of my favorites is the new Nexodyne microphones that we just came out with.
Oh my gosh,
Yeah.
I did reviews on those.
Yeah,
So nice.
it's, they don't sound far off in terms of fidelity from something like a SM58 or a Beta 58, but the rejection on those it's outrageous, and it's really cool the way that they work. So it has 2 capsules, rather than 2 complete microphone capsules, and not like a dual diaphragm. It's like 2 microphones in one basically, and one is buried in the handle and it's wired in reverse polarity. So not only does that eliminate all of your handling noise, but it also, and I hope I don't butcher explaining this because our acoustic engineers have explained some really complicated stuff here to me, and I'm just like hanging on for dear life trying to understand how these things work. But
You're doing great.
there's so normally like a cardioid microphone has a delay network and it has vents on the side. That's why if you cut like an SM57, if you block those side vents, it essentially turns it into an omnidirectional microphone because you're not letting anything into the back. But basically through that, sounds that are coming from the back of the microphone go through that delay network and then they crash at the diaphragm at the exact same time and those
Mhm.
get canceled out. And so this microphone works not only on that principle, but there's also a certain amount of off-axis um, sound that actually leaks in through the vents, and then
Right.
is that additional stuff cancels out to give you even better rejection. And so the big difference, if you look at data of like a polar plot, and sorry, I'm getting really dorky here with
I'm
microphone
digging this, please.
specs, but yeah, so if you look at any traditional dynamic microphone, you're going to see that like at 1 kilohertz, you get just a textbook cardioid pattern.
Mm.
But when you get into the really high or sometimes the really low frequencies, if you're measuring it like 10K or 8K or something,
Yeah.
you'll start to notice that polar pattern doesn't look like the traditional heart cardioid shape anymore. It looks more like Jackson Pollock got a hold of it. And so you get these weird, it's just the nature of physics and how it works. And so a lot of times if it's a vocal mic, for example, and you're playing in a band with a loud drummer, you get a lot of cymbal bleed or guitar stuff. Or if you are using them, we make little instrument microphones. The NXN6 is a clip-on tom microphone.
Yeah.
And so that's like, what, 6 inches from a ride cymbal. Or if you're using it on snare, it's like a couple inches from your hi-hat, which is like you know, the thing that every audio engineer has been fighting their entire life is to get that hi-hat out of the snare. And so even
The
like
bleed.
yeah, exactly. And so really the difference is through the entire frequency spectrum, you have a textbook cardioid pattern. And it makes such a big difference. Like one of that live record I was talking about, which I did, I believe that was last summer that we tracked that. Once I brought it in the mix, we had used the NXN8 on vocals. And the fact that not only do you not have bleed of those elements, but it's like, I want to put a little reverb on the vocal without it like adding to the snare drum, or I want to do a little bit of like compression without bringing all of those other things like way up. And so gives you more knobs to turn. And it's like, it's one of those things that even, when we were working on it, I was like, another dynamic mic. Okay, I have a bunch of mics that I already love and use all the time. But it wasn't until I actually got into the mixing phase where I became a true believer, where I was like, oh, okay, this unlocks a whole bunch of stuff for me.
Well, and you hit it, directly on what amazed me was to where you've got the capsule in the handle and then the other capsule. I'm like going, and when I was like going, oh my gosh, who was like sitting around going, yeah, that's the idea right there. We'll put the 2 of those into one mic and then it works.
Yep, exactly. And we have the acoustic engineering team at Shure is full of like, I don't know if like what the technical definition of a genius is, but there's a couple people in our microphone lab who are just on another level of thinking, and they come up with so much cool stuff, and it's really exciting to go in and see what they've been kind of tinkering with, whether it's just concepts and designs, or if they have, spare parts laying around and they come up with kind of a Frankenstein microphone, which has led to microphones actually being, turned into production mics.
Right.
And it's really awesome to see that come together and then have them explain to you all the cool things that they can do. And then we, on the product management side, we are always identifying problems that customers have or gaps in the market where we think we can come out with a new product or improve something that already exists. And so we bring them those challenges of like, for example, hey, I got a bunch of bleed in my vocal mic. What can we do for this to be an even tighter puller pattern? And they go and they do a bunch of simulations on their computer and jot in their notebooks for a couple of years, and then they come back with stuff that turns into microphones.
It's so much fun though, because like I was telling you before we started the show, the Shure microphones are so iconic. And what I was going to bring up, like even with the SM7s now, I've noticed in like a lot of the new country music videos and all these things, like and influencers are now using them like handheld microphones, Steve.
Uh-huh.
And so I don't know if you're like me, because we're gear nerds, to where I'm watching these music videos and I'm seeing the different microphones and everything they're using. I'm going, oh my gosh. It's like going, "Yeah, I never thought of taking one of the SM7Bs and holding it."
Yeah, it is really funny how people behave, I guess, the design of this, it's like it fits right in your hands. So I guess
That's what I never thought of it before.
yeah, there's a lot of funny stuff that people do, whether it's that or like what we see a lot with like the little clip-on wireless lavalier mics.
Right.
People will put it on like a spatula or some type of handle, or like there's that, I forget what the series is called, but they put them on like Subway cards.
I,
Uh,
I saw
uh,
somebody today, somebody sent me a video, Steve, I kid you not. And there was a gal singing that she had duct taped her microphone to a hair dryer. And so it looked like she was singing into a hair dryer. And I'm like going, oh, okay.
yeah,
Mm.
I mean, people do all sorts of funny stuff, and part of my job and a lot of us at Shure, we pay close attention to that and say, okay, how are people actually using mics? Because you can tell somebody, for example, one of our mics, the KSM8, which is a dual diaphragm dynamic microphone,
Yep.
was designed specifically because we were working with a front of house engineer who was like, this artist just keeps cupping the microphone, and I can't get them to stop. And so the hope there was to make it so that you could still cup the grill and it didn't block off the vents, and essentially, like we were talking about earlier, turn it into an omnidirectional mic. So whether or not like you can't tell somebody, hey, drive with your hands at like 10 and 2 on the wheel, like they're still going to drive with their thumbs. And so maybe, Ford should design a steering wheel with thumb grooves. I guess they're working on
Yeah.
something.
But I got to bring this up too, to where it's like when Shure got into the whole plug-in microphones for smartphones, tablets, and all that, and they didn't get into it for a while. And I thought, wow, I'm really surprised, and people would ask me, but it's like, but when Shure got into it, they got into these microphones that plug in. And I've got one example. I've got the new MV88 USB-C stereo that I recently did a review on. And I mean, it's just an incredible mic that you can plug into any smartphone or tablet or computer. And I mean, you've got, adjustable, you've got mono cardioid, mono bidirectional. I mean, it's like, so when Shure gets into it, then the microphone I use at work for doing some voiceover, Steve, is the MV7.
Hmm. Yeah. And our entire line of motive microphones is, like you said, we were a little bit late to the market, but generally that's because we really take our time to make sure that we're doing things right. And sometimes it can seem frustratingly slow when you're on the inside and you know how the sausage is made. But we do a lot of research and we do a lot of revisions and we do a lot of testing in the field, and then we go back and we change it again. And by the time that the microphones come out, you know that we've done our homework. So like the
Right.
MV88, that one has been really popular. We released the first version of that at around, I want to say maybe 2015, plus or
I
minus
still
a
have
year.
it. I have that.
Yeah, yeah, the little silver one that had a
Yep.
lightning connector, and then we kind of switched, knowing that it was a little bit Wild West in terms of you have people who have USB-C, there was USB Micro B, there was Lightning, kind of all at
Lightning.
the same time. So we had a
Yep.
version called the MB88 Plus, which was a separate, just like little barrel microphone that went on a stand, and then you could get different cables to connect to different phones. But now that we're back on USB-C, the timing was like very obvious where it's like, oh, we can make the little one again that plugs directly into your
Right.
phone. And, that thing can do so many things because we know it's really, it's fun when we do user testing because as an audio engineer or a musician, you start to think like, oh, everybody probably does it the same way as me, but that couldn't be further from the truth. And some people like, and a lot of whether podcasters, mobile journalists, like they're storytellers. They're not like
Cool.
gear junkies or anything. And so they want to just be able to plug something in and have it sound really awesome. And so we acknowledge that with being able to just you set it to cardioid. We have a real-time denoiser, so it isolates your voice, and you press 2 buttons and you're good to go. But for the people who are doing field recording and who are recording concerts and stuff, you can record raw mid-side, so you can go in post-production, and then you can adjust your stereo width, and
Right.
do all of these things afterwards. And so it's really, the cool thing about that microphone is that it serves, like, the most entry-level customers, and eventually maybe they'll buy a KSM microphone, and it
Yeah.
also serves people who, like, are, veterans of engineering.
And I've enjoyed all of the different Motive mics. I've covered a lot of them, and I have the app on my phone as well. But just like we're talking with the MB7 and the MB7i, I believe, to where, they plug it straight in with a USB, but also you can use an XLR out, which I thought was a great design because a lot of the early microphones that were designed for USB plug-in, as you know, did not offer XLR also.
Yeah, and that's part of, again, when I was talking about when we do all this field research, and we know that people's gear and their behaviors and their habits, they change over time. So maybe you're starting with one microphone and you just want to plug it USB directly into your computer. And then maybe there's times where you have guests, or you want to do a 3-person podcast, and maybe you could chain 3 USB microphones all to the same computer. But at that point, you might have a little like Focusrite desktop interface, and you want to just plug those direct in, and you can still use them. You don't then need to go back and buy different microphones. So versatility is,
And the detail, what the team, everybody that you work with at Shure, to where it's like even on the microphones, like talking about the MV7 again, Steve, to where you can adjust the volume level and everything with the light on top, and then you got the plug for the for your headphones on the back, which sure makes headphones also. But it's like it's just the attention to details, and what impressed me also, and certainly so many of us have used them in different circumstances, are the wireless Shure mics, to where those have really become an industry standard also, wouldn't you say? Because I mean, they just sound so great. I mean, you've still got the SM58 element, but then you've got the wireless and without the latency.
Yep, that's huge. And again, I was talking earlier about the stuff that goes into that, whether you have a good or a bad wireless system. Like you might get audio from point A to point B, but again, when you use it on an instrument like a trumpet, is where you start to see that the audio quality actually is very affected by wireless transmission. And um, there's a lot of stuff that like is just really not sexy at all, but like antenna design. We have like a huge RF chamber at our engineering headquarters,
Wow.
and it's just amazing to see the work that those folks do, and it's stuff that I totally don't understand. But it's the difference between having a reliable signal, the distance you can go, and
Yeah.
like when you that's really the only thing that an artist or an engineer ultimately wants when they're using a wireless microphone is that it doesn't cut out. And obviously, with spectrum changes and everything that's happening in the world right now, it's bandwidth is becoming thinner.
Right.
And so you have to operate on, smaller parts of the spectrum. And so it gets more and more crowded. And so for the folks who do frequency coordination at big events, like what a joy.
And as you and I know also, Steve, we start talking about the rooms also, and the other RF that's mixing in, plus in-ear monitors, and so you've got all these things, and plus how many vocalists on stage. It's like going, that's a nightmare. I mean, just to try and keep all those frequencies and everything right.
Yep, exactly. And there's a lot of engineering and a lot of expertise, in the field. That's something where when you're someone like me who's doing more studio engineering, recording music, plug an XLR microphone in and it goes to your converters and it's good to go. But I'm always amazed by the folks who do this really high tier wireless stuff. Just the amount of stuff that you have to be on top of, and the amount of software that you have to switch between to make that sure that everything runs smoothly. And like as the audience, you don't have to think about any of that, and it's beautiful. But I'll always impressed at the expertise that that those folks have of being able to put a show like that together.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. Well, I got to ask you this too, not to put you on the spot, but you work in the biz, you work for sure. You get to bring some of the prototypes home and test them out in the studio too.
I do, and I mean that's it's awesome.
That is
It's great for everybody because it's awesome for me because then I get to like refine my craft and figure out like compare it to other microphones because I have plenty of non-Shure microphones, tube mics, and ribbon mics that I love to use on all different applications. So
Yeah, yeah.
part of getting to know what's good about a prototype or what work it needs is just using it and trying to be creative with it and finding my basement studio actually is I call it an electromagnetic hell chamber because my plumbing is like there's something wrong with the grounding here, but like a lot of ribbon mics and dynamic mics sound like a lightsaber when you're using them because there's like this magnetic field that just comes from my ceiling somewhere.
You got like
And
a whole
I
Tesla thing going there.
yeah, yeah, and so, like, little things like that where you discover, like, "Oh, we need to improve the shielding because, whatever is happening in my
Yeah, but it's
computer."
also cool that you get to bring that to the table by taking it to your home studio and testing it out in the field, because I think that's what you bring in as a musician and as a recording professional, mixer, producer and everything on that. It's a different perspective than I think when you're coming up with this incredible idea in an enclosed atmosphere. I mean, you got to get it out and try it.
Definitely, and I mean, that's a huge part of my job is just making sure that, essentially the description of product management at Shure is that you are the voice of the customer. So the closer you are to it and the more you know about it, the better a product you're gonna have. So even we were talking about the KSM mics, earlier, and I got through 2 of the 3. The 3rd one is actually what I'm talking into right now, which is the KSM 32,
And now it sounds so
which
cool.
yeah, it's really a unique microphone because it uses a 3/4 inch diaphragm instead of a 1 inch, but it's embossed, and so there's thousands of little micro indentations. If you look under a microscope, it's like looks like a little honeycomb. And what that does is it lowers the resonant frequency of the diaphragm, and so you still get the really kind of robust, larger than life low end that you would expect out of a 1 inch capsule, but the smaller you get with a capsule, the better your off-axis rejection is. So it kinda gets the best of both worlds of, like, a small diaphragm and a large diaphragm microphone, which is really cool. And, you talked
And
about, like, when we get to
and also you're using the digital audio interface, the MV-X2U,
I am, 'cause
right?
I'm just using my laptop. I'm not plugged into my whole studio
This
complete right
interface, I told you I covered this interface. I don't know how many of these I've told friends, just go buy one, because
yeah,
you're able to convert any XLR microphone and plug it into your smartphone, tablet, computer, whatever. And it's all just in the barrel.
yep, it's tiny, it's no frills. There's a nice little preamp in there that you get up to 60 dB of gain, which we know that the SM7 requires a lot of juice.
Oh,
And
yeah.
so we basically designed it around like, well, it's gotta be able to plug into an SM7. And it's got a chip on there, so it has a bunch of DSP that you can use for things like voice isolation. You can EQ it, you can compress it, but, I'm just using it without any DSP right now, and it's a pretty awesome way with, like, no frills to be able to just take this tiny little barrel and plug it into your computer, so
That's the only problem that I have, Steve, is that when I get these new Shure products in, is that then I want them. Because after I test them, I take them out in the field and I try them out. I record with them and do all this stuff. It's like going, now I want it. And
Yep,
then I have to buy it.
yep, and the more you use it, the more attached you become to it. But,
It's so much fun though, because I was going to bring up also, speaking of which, that you were involved in the SRH headphones. 'Cause a lot of people don't realize how many things. I mean, certainly we all think of Shure as microphones, but I mean, but Shure's involved in. I mean, just like I saw a new press release on software the other day, but the headphones. How did that work out with the headphones?
Yeah, so, Shure's been making headphones for, I wanna say maybe 15, 16 years now, maybe a little bit longer than that. My
Yeah.
my sense of time is totally out of whack, but, um, we were tasked with kinda updating those, and so the ones I'm wearing right now are the SRH 840, and we also have one called the SRH 440. And so that is a really interesting thing because you have to just like there's an objective element to it in terms of measuring the frequency response, and we have really cool measurement equipment. We have a system called the head and torso simulator. We call it HATS, is the abbreviation for that. And so you put the headphones on that and it has little microphones in the ears. And so, that takes into effect like the shape of your ear and the seal that you get on your head, because every part of a headphone is going to affect the sound. So you'll see people like swapping the pads out, which actually that can change the sound because that determines the seal that it gets against your head, the distance that it is from your ear. There's like venting, there's different acoustic resistance materials that go over the drivers that are often integrated into the pad. And so you have all these variables, and ultimately you have to figure out, okay, we know this objective curve that we want to hit for, obviously a Shure headphone or any studio headphone is going to be used for critical applications, mixing, mastering, tracking. And so then we have to do things like, select the drivers that we want to use based on those characteristics and then tune them up. So it's actually one of the most fun things because you get to spend, several hours of your day listening to different genres of music, and you start to get a pretty good idea in comparing whether it's our headphone models, competitive headphone models, taking them on and off and comparing how it compares to a studio monitor in your room, and like what details are there. And obviously there's a ton of differences between listening on headphones and monitors, but it was really fun to tune those up. And I'm pretty proud of especially the 840s of how those turned out, because they're, I believe they're 149, or maybe they went to $159. And I use them for tracking in situations that I was mixing and mastering records using them and figuring out like ultimately how does that translate. That's why everybody buys, new studio monitors, and it's all about getting your mixes to translate. And so we spent a really long time tuning those. In fact, I got my hand slapped at some point because they were like, we need to get these out. And I was just like working with the acoustic engineers on a daily basis, just like, we're like, oh, we need another half dB there. And
That
it
is
was
so
like,
cool.
all right, pal, you're done.
That is so cool. But also somebody like you, Steve, that, has headphones on all the time. I mean, and a lot of us, you working in the recording industry, even myself, I have headphones on all the time, cutting voiceover and doing stuff. So you've always got headphones on. You want the sound quality and you want them to be comfortable.
Yeah, I mean those little mechanical details go a long way, and these are, one of the things that I always notice with headphones, whether it's a prototype we're working on or competitive models, is like they start to really hurt, like right on the part that they're resting on your head. Even like they'll feel really comfortable for the first half hour or something, and then after a while, it's just like this slow burn, and it starts to dig into your skull, and like sometimes you can even feel like a little dent in your skull.
Yep.
Maybe I just have a soft head, but so little stuff like that goes a long way, and even when we were talking about these KSM microphones earlier, one of the things that I'm really proud of is some of the accessories, like the shock mounts. It looks like you can't
Yes.
see it all that well, but
Yeah, the shock mounts are awesome.
shock mounts are like the thing that drive me up a wall.
Well,
When
and people don't realize either how much they matter.
Yeah, I mean,
For the
obviously
installation.
they serve a very important purpose acoustically, but one thing that happens, our old Shure KSM microphones was like, this was like the number one thing that I was like, we need to fix this. But the bands are long. It's kind of the traditional shock mount design, and they stretch out. And if you're using them as overheads, and they start to sag in their position, and then you end up having to like tie the bands in a knot, or you get replacement bands, and they're big and they're clunky, and it's just a really frustrating thing. So we used a new material of bands on these, and rather than having 2 long bands, it
Yeah.
uses 8 short bands, and it's a material that's never gonna sag over time. So I've had some on set up on drums back there, and I left them up for, like, 3 years in the overhead position, and they never sagged, and, we just
It's funny because on the old ones and being in studios a lot, as I know you have been also, I've seen some janky methods for
Uh-huh.
making those things not sag. It's like to where people, pull out the zip ties, and I mean, I've seen duct tape. I mean, it's like people get creative instead of buying new ones.
Yeah, and so, I've had enough of that in my life, so I was like, "Let's set out to actually make a good shock mount," and, we have a really good industrial design team and a really good mechanical engineering team, and so they nailed it, and they're really expensive to make, but it's worth it because when you have a good mic, you're gonna keep this mic for 20, 30, maybe, your entire life,
Oh, totally.
however many years, and
It's a
it's
tool.
worth it to yeah, it's worth it to just have that shock mount that's gonna last, and we have little magnetic pop filters that go
I was
in
gonna bring that up.
on.
I thought the magnetic
Yeah.
filter was so cool because when I checked that out on all three of them, I'm like going, "That's just a great idea," you know?
Yeah, and it's, it's little stuff like that, and then, the gooseneck pop filters, I've got, like, another microphone set up here, and it's just they get, either that starts to move and you have a vocalist and then the distance to the microphone it's these little things that add up to, like, saving a couple minutes in a session, but it's the kinda thing that just, makes you wanna pull your hair out,
Oh, totally.
and so I think we, looked under every stone and maximized every because the old KSM mics were awesome, we
They're
maintained
still
the same.
awesome.
Yeah, the 44 and the 32, we used the same capsule. We didn't change anything about, like, the acoustic properties. We updated some things with the circuits to get, the noise floor even lower, and now the bodies are really lightweight. They're made out of anodized aluminum. They're smaller, but it was basically like, "Well, these are already awesome microphones, so we gotta really look deep to figure out where they need to be improved." And
But
so
I think
even, like
what you and the team did on them though, they look they look now. They don't look like, and not knocking the old ones. I mean, they did. They kind of had that 90s look and vibe. They still sounded great,
Yeah.
but they didn't look like the current times for a microphone.
Yeah, and one of our big goals actually with those sorry, I'm really chewing your ear off about these
This is great. I'm loving it.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, I'm really proud of how they turned out, and, the grill in the old ones, you couldn't see the capsule, and that's the heart of the microphone, and that's, like, where we spend the most money, and again, like I was saying, we build these things one at a time by hand. This isn't some, like, off-the-shelf capsule that we're just trying to, tune the response with a preamp that corrects for some weird peaky stuff, and so I was like, "These capsules sound amazing, they look amazing, let's show them off," and so we designed the grill to be not only acoustically transparent, but also visibly transparent. Because I mean, like I said earlier, I'm like a moth towards the light with microphones, and I love them in all shapes and sizes, but when you're an engineer and you have somebody coming in to cut a vocal or to use something, like, they wanna be impressed, and they wanna, like, justify that they're paying your rate to come into your studio and use your cool gear, so, like, they should be impressed, and, it's the same as, like, I think monitor mixes are really important because that's good if it sounds good in your headphones, it's gonna give a better performance, whether you're a
Totally.
drummer or vocalist or instrumentalist. And I feel like the same goes for if you, like, have this object in front of you that you're like, "I am cutting a record right now." So, anyway, I could go off for
And that's the thing, I mentioned to you before we started doing the show, even Steve, like anytime I've gone to any studio, like in the multiple studios I've gone to here in Nashville and other places, I'm always like, I tell the engineers, like, can you take me to your microphone booth? And
Uh-huh.
then it's like Valhalla because like, they open up the cabinet or the closet and they've got like all their microphones and it's like going, and they're so excited to show them. But also, as you and I know, I mean, they're tools and you have to have the right microphone for the voice, for the instruments, for everything you're doing. And a studio until you have the musicians and everything else in there, it's just an empty space, which hopefully is a dead sounding space. But I mean, you got to have the microphones.
Yep, and they all serve a different purpose, and they're all, creative tools, which is ultimately, like, I could care less about the microphone as an object, but,
Yeah.
those of us who are into this, obviously, we love music and we love making records, and it's so cool to be able to shape that and, knowing that, whether it's 10 people or thousands or millions of people are gonna hear the track, like, the fact that you get to shape those sounds and have people, like, have an emotional experience because of it is pretty awesome, so
Well, and also, I get sent so much music for artists and bands and stuff wanting to come on my TV show on the Rock and Review. And some of the mixes just aren't good. And I mean, and I'm a pretty critical listener, I'm sure like yourself. And it's like going, I want to be able to hear the voice. I want to be able to hear the individual instrumentation, whatever that is, and to where it comes alive. And if something is louder, like if it's like predominantly drums and the vocals are covered, it's like going, no matter how good the song is, it doesn't sound that good if it doesn't have a good mix.
yeah, and I mean, even someone who has, like, no technical knowledge is gonna be able to hear that, maybe better than a lot of us are already deconstructing, and we're thinking about frequency response and compression, but, like, just someone who loves music, who has never stepped foot in a recording studio is gonna be like, "This sounds like an amateur made it," or a great sounding record, they'll just get lost, they don't think about the engineering, and they focus on the music, and
Right.
that's
It's
the
the way it
ultimate
should be.
goal.
So,
Yeah.
I gotta put you on the spot because I know whenever I checked out the new Shure microphones, and I loved them, once again, I didn't wanna send them back. But, what what are the bands or what are the songs that you test every headphone with?
Oh, that's a great question. So since I do a fair amount of mastering, I have like a set of like 10 songs that I use that are really they're not necessarily like the gold standard of like this is the greatest recording ever. I mean, they're selected to be good recordings, but a lot of them had to do more with like which ones are pushing the limits of low end and which ones are pushing the limits of high end and what are the loudest records and what is like the most tasteful. So like I'll just rattle off a couple that come to mind. There's an Esperanza Spalding record. I can't remember what the record's called off the top of my head, but there's a song called Judas off of it. And I mean, she's a phenomenal bass player and singer and arranger, and the recordings are beautiful. But they are like one of the things that I love about the recordings is that they're very detailed and they're like pretty bright. So if you're listening on like a really bright system, they get a little sizzly. And so that's like a great like kind of guardrail, I guess, if I'm, like, boosting the high end a little bit, it's like, "All right, don't go any further than this." If I can match that, that's great. But so that's a good reference. For things like loudness, there's a Deftones record. I'm trying to think of which one it is. It's one of their newer records, but it's like if you use, LUFS to measure your loudness, it's like negative it gets into, like, the -4 zone sometimes, and it's like but the record sounds so good. It's like, they're a heavy band, and when you can get away with it, yeah, when you have a heavy band where a lot of, like, everything is already really compressed and kind of squared off anyways, but it sounds so good, and I can't believe that it gets that loud because if I push something through a limiter at that point, it sounds like absolute total garbage. So whatever they had some voodoo going on there, and it sounds great, which actually the word voodoo reminds me, D'Angelo's Voodoo is another, like, sonic masterpiece to me, so um, that's one where it's I mean, that's an easy one because that's gonna sound good on anything, and it's already such a warm recording, so you can't make that record sound bad, so that's usually just like "Alright, where how am I stacking up?" And then things like uh, a lot of Kendrick Lamar records have, like, such strong low end, and so that's usually my reference for low end, and then there's things like, being a Chicago person, obviously, Steve Albini is, like, a huge, in the world, but, particularly in Chicago, he left a huge,
Totally.
impact, and so, there's a shellac record, that came out it must have been around, like I think it's called Dude Incredible. And it was mastered by Bob Weston, who is also the bass player in that band, and that record is like, I don't know how I would describe it as like gentleman's mastering because it's so dynamic and it's so quiet, and that's my reminder of like, I don't need a limiter to make this sound good, but it's like the drums on that record just sound huge and like, a band that can play really quiet or a whether it's a record that's mastered that way, then when it gets loud, it just hits you, and so that's another reference. I have a bunch of other references, but
I think that's so neat because I mean, I that it's and I still go back to, for me, I'll like pull up like Toto, of course, and check some things, and then certainly, certain Steely Dan songs. But then, yeah, I think you got to have different. I think that's so smart the way you're doing it to have the different references. It's just like with some of the Miles Davis stuff or some of the Thelonious Monk, just like different. And I think also from different eras, you know to have those in your headphones to be able to like, okay, can I really hear everything that's in this mix or not?
right, right, yeah, and I also make sure to, like the reason I use more of those, like, guardrails rather than having, like, a North Star that I'm going towards is because, like, it's never gonna sound like that, and you don't wanna end up chasing something that's, like, totally unrelated because you're just gonna end up being totally disappointed, and, like, if you're trying to, like, match the frequency response of something, it's just I tend to, like, use the reference as a very last step where I like follow my judgment and I follow my ears and my heart and get it to where I think it sounds good. And then it's kind of a sanity check. Obviously if it's late at night and you've been listening to a lot of music all day, sometimes your high end starts to get a little out of whack. And so that's more
Yep.
of like hey, am I hitting the target here or not? But to your point about like, a lot of like older records versus modern records are so wildly different in not
Oh,
only their production and their arrangements and their mastering. And I think it's really important to remember that like all of that stuff needs to be played especially when we're talking about tuning up a headphone, like you can't,
right.
um, you know, skimp on the bass or like crank up 80 hertz because that's just going to sound really weird on a lot of recordings. So
Yeah, and I think also, particularly for people like, I'm sure that are watching or listening to the show for Gear Gab, to where more critical listeners, they're not using the headphones just for volume or isolation. They want to be able to have critical listening and hear the details. And just like you were talking about, with the cymbals and with all these different things. And it's like, I know when I'm listening to acoustic guitar too, I like to hear the fingers on the strings. I like to hear that kind of, let me hear that kind of clarity. I like to hear, sometimes I like to hear the pick on the bass strings.
Yeah.
They're using their, it's like just certain things like that that you can pick out, but it's got to be with the right, headphones.
Yeah, yeah. And you know what? I have a great recommendation based on you talking about like hearing the strings on the fingers and those details. Maybe you're already familiar with this record, but Blake Mills and Pino Palladino. Have you heard
Yeah.
their like? Yeah, oh my goodness, that has been like the most inspiring. Their newest record and the one that came out before that called Notes with Attachments has
Right.
both like musically been extremely inspiring to me, but also sonically, I just get lost in those records. If
Yeah.
anyone hasn't heard those, whether you're an audiophile or a music lover or probably both, um, I
Yeah.
can't get
Just
over it.
amazing. I mean, incredible musicians and recorded incredibly well. I got to ask you too, when you're at home recording, other bands and musicians and all this, what are your favorite Shure microphones that you always go to?
That's a great question. So the new KSM stuff, just because I know it intimately well, makes it really easy to make good engineering decisions. Um, Another favorite
So,
is
so
the
which of your KSMs is your favorite of your three?
oh, this sounds like a Solomon's baby dilemma. So I'll answer that um, with I really like them on different applications. So for example, the KSM 40, like I was saying, that one is a single diaphragm. So I love that on bass amps because you get a little bit more proximity effect. And I actually did
Yep.
a shootout with a bunch of different mics. And I have some expensive, tube mics. Not everything here is Shure. I have a lot of Shure mics, but I like them all. And I kept picking the KSM 40 and I was like, all right, well, that's great. Cause it's like a quarter of the price, a lot of those other mics that and I mean, whether you put like a FET 47 or an SM7 or the KSM, like if you're a good bass
But that
player,
KSM 40 sounds so good.
it does. It does. And actually, when we were thinking about all the refresh, we used to make a microphone called the KSM 42, which was it was basically a KSM 44. It had the dual diaphragm, but it was just fixed cardioid, and it had a little bit of like a low frequency roll off built in, and it was great. It was like that is your voiceover mic, and it was so specialized, but it didn't sell very well because it was like, well, maybe I should just pay another $100 and get the KSM 44 in case I want to do like figure eight and do like a bloom line or a mid-side recording. And so what we did, we changed it up and we said, well, what if we just make a single diaphragm version of the same capsule and differentiate it? Because now I have a very clear reason if I would use a KSM 40 either on a bass cab or outside of a kick drum. It sounds really good there, and having the built-in pop filter, you don't need to worry about any over excursion on the diaphragm.
Oh yeah.
Whereas like the 44, I love it as a vocal mic. I love it as an overhead, especially for like jazzier stuff where you don't want a ton of coloration and you want a natural capture. Works great there. And then the 32, depending on the vocalist, I really love that microphone. That also works really well as an overhead, depending on, since it has that tighter polar pattern, it's a tough decision between the 32 or the 44 of like, do you want those two overheads to kind of blend together a little bit, or do you want more separation? And so if it's like a really dense record and you really want your ride cymbal like really focused, that could be a good choice. It sounds great on guitar amps.
Wow.
Because the 32 is the flattest of all of them, but then around maybe 14 or 15K, it starts to roll off a little bit.
Wow.
I'm a big fan of U67s. It's a studio that so I work at a larger studio up in Skokie, Illinois, which is just north of Chicago. It's called Real Sounds. And we have a pair of vintage U67s there, and I love those on overheads, and I love them on horns. Like I'll put up like a Coles 4038 and the U67 on like a trumpet, and it's like it's perfect. But anyway, so I'm a big U67 fan, and it also has that kind of like slight roll off in those really high frequencies, and that's something that the KSM 32 does. Which is not to say that I'm comparing one or the other. They're still a different different beast, and I love them
Right.
both. So I really like it for anything that I want that kind of warmer character. And it's also the cheapest of all of them.
I was going to bring that up to where, when before you and I started doing the show, I did not realize. I just assumed you were on the higher of the three, and so when you said you were on the KSM 32, I'm like going, "Wow,
Yeah,
that's the most cost effective of the three."
yeah, and I love how small it is. I love it on toms as well, because it's easier to position because it's a pretty tiny microphone and having that extra off-axis rejection, so you don't get a ton of cymbals. So, but you know what else I love on toms? I shouldn't plug too many microphones since I'm here representing Shure, but who cares? There's love to go around. The Josephson E22. Every time I use that
Mhm.
on a tom, I'm like, oh my goodness. That's a great, and Josephson in general, any microphone that they make is just incredible. I have their
There's just so many tools like that. It's like basses and guitars and microphones. It's like going, man, once you start going down that rabbit hole, it's like, oh my goodness, Steve.
yeah, it's exciting. I mean, I have a divorceable amount of microphones and basses and guitars, so I'm with you on that.
But we always need one more.
Of course. Yep.
You know,
They all serve a purpose, you know?
they really do. But it's so much fun. Well, I mean, not to put you on the spot. I know more of the stuff is going to be rolling out from sure in the fall. Usually in October, and obviously for the NAM show, you guys roll everything out. But is there anything special that you guys are kind of working on? What I mean, because it seems like particularly in this past year or so, Steve, that Shure has really been doing a great job of getting into more of the software angle as well with the products, and like I mentioned, even with the app, for the Motive microphones, which I thought was a great concept to be able to mix and change up and do stuff like that. But I mean, it seems like Shure is really positioning themselves not only as a legacy sound reinforcement company, but kind of for the next 100 years.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, you nailed it. And that's very, very kind of you to say, and that's exactly what we're doing. Our whether we're talking about like the MVX2U earlier, there's like that's the DSP on that is ultimately what makes that a really special product. Being able to match, you can plug any microphone into it, and it's going to make it sound good. And then we do some really creative
And it's
stuff.
reasonably priced also.
Yeah, yeah. I believe it's 129, 139.
Yeah, I think you're right.
I should have studied the price sheet before hopping on this call with you. But we make a version of the MV7 called the ME7i. I don't know if you're familiar with that one, but
NB7i is the one that I'm using
oh, nice, yeah.
at
Which is
at work on me.
yeah, and that's one of those things where we sometimes, we have meetings every once in a while where we'll lock ourselves in a room and we'll just kind of riff on what kind of cool stuff could we come up with, what are we missing, and that one was like, well, there's a lot of people who are going to be playing guitar or bass or like a keyboard, and obviously like musicians are a huge core customer for us, and so that one acknowledges that like, well, not everyone has an interface, so you have this microphone, and then you can run a second channel whether you want to plug an instrument.
I was gonna
Or
bring that up because you could daisy chain it basically.
yeah, yeah, and so or it's also, like, part of that design intent was that you can run a second microphone, so it has an input on it, so if you're doing a two-person podcast, that rather than having 2 microphones and an interface, you just buy this microphone, and then you can plug any whether it's an SM58 or another MV7 or SM7, you can chain that off of that microphone. So, but to your question about what are we, currently cooking up, that's all confidential, so I can't, give any, spoilers away there, but I can say that, I'm working on some stuff right now that is like really, really exciting for me personally. That's just like, one of the exciting things when you've been, working in this industry for a long time, a lot of it just feels like, oh yeah, I know how that stuff works. And we're getting into some really cool territory where I'm having to learn a lot of new things. And
Nice.
it's breaking my brain a little bit, which is I love.
Well, and I was gonna bring up another thing too, just a compliment, for the team you work with and with Sure. It seems like they're also really acknowledging like, the influencer world, and certainly, all of these people that are doing, just using their phones, Steve, and doing videos and doing music and all these things to whereas, a lot of us came up to where studios and all this kind of stuff, but they're just doing it like in a garage, you know what I mean? Or out on the street and still using Shure microphones in those applications.
Yeah, and I think that harkens back to like, obviously microphones like the KSM series and stuff. That's really close to my heart because I'm like a studio freak and everything. But there's a lot of people that they're not like microphone dorks like us, and they just want to either make music or, like I was saying, like a lot of podcasters are like they're storytellers. They're not audio engineers, and so really it comes down to like you can fight the current or you can ride the wave, and we know that people are going to use their phones, and so we're choosing to be like, all right, that's how you want to work. We're going to give you the best possible audio that you can get. And that's a cool thing about the MVX2U is that whether you can plug it into a laptop, it'll work with a tablet, it'll work with a phone, and it's like, all right, whatever you want to record on, go for it.
Well, and like I told you, I've told so many people about that interface because, you know, once again, microphone nerd like yourself, I'm plugging all my different microphones into it and testing them out and going, oh my gosh, to be able to plug that in and just have a USB-C from the interface to my phone or to my computer or my tablet or whatever, and it still sound great and using my favorite microphones.
Yep, that is the exact idea. And actually that product in particular, not to get too into the weeds here, but that was actually really challenging because a lot of when we talk about like the MB7, that has a specific set of DSP that microphone has a transducer that DSP only has to work for that particular microphone, and so it's tuned up specifically to it. But the DSP that we had to use on the MVX2U needs to work with anything like you could plug an SM58, you could plug a U87, you could plug anything that you want into it. And we had to do some stuff in terms of like making sure that not only does it have enough gain, but like we don't want to overdrive it, and things like how much gain does it get before it hits the there's a real-time denoiser in it, which isolates your voice and takes out all the background noise. And that is very gain dependent. And so we had to do a lot of kind of stuff behind the scenes, some tricks to make sure that our we call it gain ranging, which is basically just digital gain that gets added in the background to basically get that within the target that then the algorithm can identify like what is noise and what is voice. And so that was actually a huge challenge, and it works really well. It sounds like you already put it through its paces. So that was like,
Again, I'm not to buy it. And then also I've introduced a number of my friends that do voiceover work to where when they're in the field or they're on a trip or something, that they can take that and then do the voiceover work while they're traveling because they don't have their home studio to do voiceover work. And it's like I said, with the MV2XU, X2U, it's just like throw it in your pocket and, you got your microphone and your phone and there you go.
yep, exactly. That's what it's for.
Well, I want to make sure, and I've also got to bring up a shout out to our partner, Acoustic Coffee Company, to where if people are listening or watching our show, if you use the code Gear Gab, you get 20% off your first order of acoustic coffee. And also I'll be sending a bag of acoustic coffee to you, Steve, for being my
Oh, thank you. I appreciate it.
so I'll be in touch with you to see, if you want whole bean or ground or.
Oh, yeah, I'm a whole bean guy.
Awesome. Well, I want to make sure, talking about everything Shure microphones and with everything you've got going, and I know you're going to have to come back on the show again to tell us about the new top secret stuff that you're working on that will be coming out in October probably, and also more stuff for the NAMM show for 2027. But website wise for Shure, and then also for yourself, for our viewers and everything, can you give us those websites?
Yeah. So Shure's website is just www.shure.com. And there's a ton of stuff on there for every product that we make. And there's a lot of cool stuff for like, the folks who are, you were saying earlier that you have a bunch of vintage Shure mics. There's a whole bunch of cool like tech notes and stuff and historical stuff that's really interesting to read. In fact, we have, we're lucky to have a big enough company that we have a corporate historian.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, so this guy, his name's Michael Pedersen, and he knows like everything about Shure history, like every single model. He can like tell you which parts were used and a good story behind it. He's been at Shure for probably maybe 40 years. So yeah, so there's a lot of really cool kind of historical stuff and blog posts and everything. So it's
Yeah.
definitely worth checking out. And then my website for kind of my music and engineering and all of that stuff is stevemerrickmusic.com. And that has a whole bunch of music samples and stuff and groups that I play in. And yeah.
And also if they need a great bass player for something, right?
Well, I guess you haven't heard me play, so I could be pretty terrible, but I appreciate you being so kind.
I don't think so. I don't think so. With the projects and bands you're playing with and with the instruments I saw you with, I think you know what you're doing pretty well.
Yes, yeah. Yep. Okay. Well, yeah. If you need me to play bass on anything, just hit me up.
Well, I want to thank you so much, Steve Merrick from SHURE, coming on the show, talking with us about the microphones, the headphones, all the other great products. I know I had a great time. Also, I mentioned it to you before, going to a Rock Nashville, and for the big SHURE party, it was the celebration. See, I almost wore my T-shirt they gave me for the 60 years, and it was like they were giving SM57 grills while they were grilling. So there you go, grills and grills. So you're dented SM58, and it was pretty. You got to come out, Steve.
Yeah, I would love to. I haven't been to Nashville in probably 2 or 3 years, so I'm due for a trip there.
I think you're due. And once again, thank you so much, Steve Merrick, for coming on Gear Gab and sharing your knowledge with us about the microphones, the headphones, and all of the cool SHURE products. You're definitely going to have to come back on the show, okay?
I would love to. Thank you, Eric. I appreciate you having me.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining the Gear Gab Podcast with Eric Dahl. Subscribe to our weekly conversations on your favorite platform. And if you like what you hear, don't forget to leave us a review. Follow us on social media at Gear Gab Podcast. You'll never know who our next guest will be.